is a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump. Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and we need to continue talking about Christian nationalism. What is it? Do we agree with it? Do we agree with one definition over another? Well, part of this is I think a lot of people don't agree on the precise definition of Christian nationalism. So my good friend, Pastor Grant Castleberry, tweeted this: "My general take on Christian nationalism. It is good and right for a government to acknowledge that the triune God is Lord, to recognize his moral law, second table, that God establishes rulers and nations. The jurisdiction of a government's power is minimal, mainly to punish crime and provide for a national defense. It does not bear the sword to advance the kingdom because the kingdom does not advance by the sword. At the same time, it is not right for a government to force people to Christian belief against their consciences, nor is it right for the state to establish an official national church." These are thoughts in process. The general overarching principle, as I understand it, is the lordship of Jesus Christ. Every institution and nation in the world should acknowledge his lordship. This is a great start, and I'll be right back with more discussion on Christian nationalism with Grant Castleberry right after this. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. All right, so I'd like to welcome back to the show, and it's been way too long, Grant Castleberry, who is a senior pastor out of North Carolina. And Grant, in the opening, I read your tweet thread that I thought was really well articulated and kind of this dual purpose, I think, in Christian nationalism and this entire topic that I see a lot of potential pitfalls for the greater evangelical community and God's people as a whole. And the first one I want to address is the definition, because a lot of what I'm seeing in terms of the conversation and the both the pros and cons and the for and against around this topic really focus on the fact that there isn't a uniform definition of Christian nationalism. So how do you see this?
Yeah, I think that's one of the difficulties is people are talking past one another. And I think the secularist, the people that aren't even Christians, they would say Christian nationalism is simply acknowledging God and his lordship over our nation. And they're saying that's Christian nationalism. Any mentioning of Christ or God in the public arena, that's got to go. Whereas you have on the other end of the spectrum, some quote Christian nationalists that are saying, well, we need to essentially have a state church. We need to put in place blasphemy laws and actually swinging to really a far end of the spectrum where the state is in some way punishing religious actions. And I don't think the Bible teaches that. I don't think that's an American principle. And I don't think in the history of the church, it's worked very well at all.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about that. And the modern blasphemy laws have started to percolate with things like censorship of disagreement over issues like the LGBT agenda. I mean, a lot of those things, and now the new law that is being promulgated out of California, that if a parent disagrees with a gender transition of their child, then custody can be taken away. I mean, those are essentially blasphemy laws that if you don't have a viewpoint, whether it's on parenting or any other issue that comes from a viewpoint that is inherently religious, which I think you and I would say every viewpoint comes from a place of a worldview perspective. How do we understand the world around us? What do we think about God? What do we think about morality? But if our viewpoint is not preferred by the government, then we can be punished for our political viewpoints that factor into a religious basis. And so it's very dangerous. I think you're absolutely right that some of the proponents of Christian nationalism are basically advocating for a theocracy that our founders completely rejected. But then on the flip side, you do have the total secularists that are suggesting, well, God is nowhere in society. We have to have this total separation and the erected wall between church and state. And that's also something that our founders clearly rejected. So how should we define Christian nationalism in the proper sense, and how a genuine biblically based Christian, a member of the faith, would be a proponent of while rejecting the dangers on both ends?
I mean, I think that's what I was trying to do in that tweet that I sent out. And by the way, I sent that out in the middle of COVID, having COVID. I literally have just, I'm just in bed and finally kind of getting my senses, and I'm just following the different arguments going back and forth, the different barrages. And I, it's not something, it didn't come out of nowhere. I've been thinking about this and studying the scriptures, and I'm a student of American history. I'm a student of history, it's, in general. So it's something that I've thought about quite a bit. But to go back to something that you said, I think in listening to Christian nationalists and Christian thinkers for a long time, you're absolutely right that there's no neutral sphere. Either something is an institution, a government, a state, a club, either they're going to promote a Christian worldview, a Christian ideology under the lordship of Christ, or they're going to promote an atheistic or pagan ideology. So there's this myth, I think, that Americans had for a long time, that you can have some sort of neutral arena that doesn't lean one way or the other. And that just simply isn't true. There is going to be a worldview driving whatever institution or state. And I do think it's important. This is where I think the Christian nationalists do have somewhat of a point, is we need to go back and ask the question, what is the worldview that is governing our institutional leaders, our national leaders? And should that worldview be under the lordship of Jesus Christ? And I absolutely think the answer to that question is yes. Because what you're seeing right now are people that are advancing a godless worldview and punishing and persecuting Christians who simply speak the truth in under their own protections of religious liberty, and they're being punished for it, for blasphemy laws. So they're advancing a godless worldview over and against Christianity. To your question about, how should we think about this overall? Well, I've been greatly helped, one, by going back to the New Testament and looking at what Paul says that governing authorities are supposed to do in Romans chapter 13. And he basically says they're supposed to punish evildoers. They are supposed to promote good. And from that, I think we can infer that they're supposed to supply a defense of the country, a defense of the state, if that nation is attacked. Well, you look at that definition of government. It is a very limited government. It has a very limited jurisdiction. And I think that's an important thing for Christians to understand, is that the government's jurisdiction is to bring God's judgment in real time on evildoers. If somebody commits murder, if somebody lies about somebody else, there needs to be a punishment levied against that. And that's why historically people have said the government has the power of the sword. It has the power to execute capital punishment or other types of punishment against evildoers, whereas the church does not have that power. We're not to, somebody walks into our church and denies the Trinity, we're not to execute them. We're to teach them, we're to evangelize them, and we're to show them the truth and plead them to come to faith and repentance in the Lord Jesus Christ. So I've operated with this understanding that there's two kingdoms, both under the sphere of Christ's lordship, but the kingdom of government does not wade into the kingdom of religion, and nor does the kingdom of the church, the gospel, nor does that weigh into punishing evildoers. You need to keep those jurisdictions separate. And I was actually looking at my Reformation Study Bible, and I want to read you. This is what R.C. Sproul said in the Reformation Study Bible. This is a note he had on Romans 13. I think it's really helpful. It's very, very short, very simple. He says, "It is the task of the church to preach the gospel, administer the sacraments, nurture the souls of its members, etc. These are not the task of the state. It is the state's responsibility to order society, raise taxes, govern business and society, maintain a standing army, protect life and property, etc. These are not the task of the church. The state is given the power of the sword, the church is not," the Apostle Paul declares. So in that sense, yes, as members of the state, we are subject to the governing authorities in that sphere. And we should hope and pray that those governing authorities are Christians and understand that God has given them that authority, that they are under the lordship of Jesus Christ, and that the laws that they enact, they should enact godly laws, because God is the one who has put them in their respected positions. So yeah, I think it's fine and good for a congressman, a senator to say, we need to have a law against stealing because God says we shall not steal. I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and the idea that we legislate morality, we can't escape that, because all law is inherently moral in terms of what a civil society prohibits or what it permits, and also what it rewards. And so this whole idea that we have can have a pluralistic society and have a different measurable standard of where morality is derived from, I think is how we have gotten so far off track into a post-truth society and a relativistic framework. And what we're seeing today in society is now total chaos, because all of these people in elected office and all of the average citizens who want to exercise rights have a very different idea of where morality is derived from and the measurable difference between right and wrong and good and evil. And so I think we would all accept, and even atheists and secularists would accept, hopefully, that the church is a very different jurisdiction than the state. And that's where we can at least agree on. I mean, historically, of course, there has been a lot of tension when the state tries to come into the province of the church and tell the church how, when, and where it can exercise its right to exercise its freedom of religion and how to worship. And that's one whole category that's very difficult. But setting that aside and just presuming for sake of argument here that we at least agree, or that most people in America would agree, that civil society and religious jurisdiction of the church are separate, and the civil society has a different function than the church does. I think the problem isn't even as much that we meaning Christians are arguing for theocracy, that the church is supposed to then control the state. It's really a matter of where does the state derive its definition of morality from? And that is being twisted and perverted into this argument of a theocracy that I think we do need to clearly separate, because it doesn't matter for purposes of what is legitimate legislative prerogative and how we legislate against stealing or against rape or against murders or any of these other things. It doesn't matter where each individual citizen goes to church, what faith they are, how they practice. None of that would be under the jurisdiction and province of the church matters to the legitimacy of civil society. And so where I see the real tension point in terms of Christian nationalism in this whole discussion is that we're arguing theocracy when really we should be arguing pluralism. Do you see that also?
I think you can't force people to be Christians. I mean, you can't compel people against their consciences that they be Trinitarians. We must preach the truth, preach the gospel. I mean, that's my job as a minister. My job as a minister, I encourage godly guys to go into politics, guys in our church that are thinking, praying about that have been in politics. And I love that. I want to promote that. I want them to do that. My job as a minister of the gospel is to win people to Christ and to teach them the truth. And when you have a government that one has a state church and begins to mandate certain religious practices. I mean, I read the story of the Puritans under Bloody Mary in England. I mean, it's a terrible thing where you have one group of Christians persecuting another group of Christians because they don't agree with the practices that they want to enact. And so I think religious freedom, as our founders, largely based on Baptist, the teachings of Roger Williams and others, is a great thing. And I don't want the state meddling in my church for
absolutely.
1 minute.
And I fully agree with you on that
1 minute.
point. And the state should not be telling the church how to worship. And so I'm talking about if we kind of cabin the church's jurisdiction in this conversation and talk about, okay, then what about the legitimacy of the government? Because when we're talking about what laws to enact, like whether or not the state can control children and can take them away from their parents if their parents don't agree with this gender affirming care, or how we can have pornography in our classrooms that are state funded, or any of these other things that are inherently moral, even if we don't want to define them, and I would say inherently religious, but inherently moral. Then the issue that I see with pluralism is this whole idea that if we're just talking about the civil jurisdiction of society, we all currently have different views on where our rights come from, what is defined as good versus evil, what is the legitimacy of the government to enact moral laws. And our founders and our framers didn't see it that way. They said that our rights come from God, our creator, and the sole purpose of government is to preserve and protect them. They talked about natural rights and natural law. If you look at what is actually natural versus unnatural, marriage between a man and a woman is natural. It is unnatural to have a homosexual marriage. If you look at where children can actually come from, that is natural between one man and one woman, not from a surrogate and a petri dish, right? I mean, so many of these things that we're contemplating just within the realm of civil government have such an intrinsic aspect of morality and the laws of nature and of nature's God that we're all arguing a various form and definition of morality that I think is really affecting the conversation around Christian nationalism.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, and that's the problem with our whole culture, is the relativism and the rejection of God. So when you reject God, it's like you cut your tether off on your spacewalk and now you're free floating out in space. You don't have any basis for a standpoint of morality for anything. So everything will be subjective. And that's why Romans 13, Paul says authority, even government authority, it's not the church, but it's still from God.
Yes.
That's the starting point. He even says that the governing leaders are God's deacon, they're God's servants. So when I talk to government guys, I'm like, look, you're there because God put you there. You're not under the church's authority, but you're under God's authority. Therefore, you have a responsibility to serve God in your position. And that means, and I think that our founders, by and large, not all of them were Christians. Many of them were deists, but they all believed in God. They weren't atheists. And they all understood that it was the providence of God that led to the establishment of this country. They acknowledged God. For years, they had chaplains coming into the Senate and to the Congress praying in Jesus' name, God's name. They acknowledged that God was over this country and that certain things were wrong because God said they were wrong. I remember I went and toured Yuma prison. I was stationed out in Yuma, Arizona, out in the middle of the desert. People have seen that movie 3:10 to Yuma and the jail that was out there. And it was basically like an Alcatraz, except it was on a sea of sand and you couldn't get away. You would die in the desert if you tried to escape. And I asked the moderator of the museum there, I said, what was the number one offense that landed somebody in Yuma prison? And you're not going to believe it. It was adultery.
Wow.
Adultery was the number one offense that got you in Yuma prison. What says adultery's wrong? The scriptures do. Mm-hmm. So they were operating under the standpoint that God said adultery is wrong. It should be punishable. It's a law that relates to how we deal with other people, with namely our spouses. Therefore, you could be sentenced to Yuma prison for that. Mm-hmm. That just shows you how far we've come in our country, where this used to be passé. People used to refer to God, his laws all the time. And now that we've lost any sense of God, now it's just, as you said, pluralism.
Well, and I think that this has led to a lot of Christians calling for Christian nationalism in the sense that in the Romans 13 context, that I think is a genuine and correct context of Christian nationalism, to say that all authority ultimately is God's. And we know that he has then given limited legitimate authority to his three spheres of government: the civil government, the church government, and the family government. And those exist in different jurisdictions, but all authority is still God-given. And so if we then act as officers in any of those three spheres against the morality and the nature of God and against his natural law, then we are acting illegitimately. And that used to be understood in that example that you just presented. I mean, it used to be understood that there are sins that are punished by the civil government. And we need to have those conversations. Why? Just because a person, maybe they're not part of the church and they don't ascribe to religion, but just as much as it is immoral to commit the offense of adultery as it is to commit the offense of rape or the offense of murder, then we need to have these conversations of why certain licentiousness is now permissive in society, and we are shrinking what the civil government's legitimate role is, but yet we're expanding it to cover certain political viewpoint and speech that is clearly within the right to disagree and the right of natural law and rights that God not only has clearly given us, but here in the United States, we've specifically enumerated in our U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights as the rights that government so often and more immediately infringes upon. And so I think we've just gotten this so upside down that there's no limiting principle now as to what actually the definition of good and morality versus bad and evil. And so everyone is just using that in whatever definition they particularly want to. And it's up to whatever, going all the way back to the Old Testament, man did what was right in his own eyes. And that's almost where our legal system has come to, that whatever is right in our own eyes should be permissible, or whatever is right or wrong in the eyes of whoever is holding power, instead of an objective standard of morality outside of man. And I don't see, Grant, that our legitimacy in our civil government can persist if we all have totally different views of the definition of morality and the measurable difference between right and wrong and good and evil. Then our laws will become completely arbitrary, like they are, and they'll become entirely confused as well and unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's God's judgment on our country, where you're seeing chaos, confusion, and as there's more chaos and confusion, the state just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more powerful. I really think that the only way that our country will be improved, our country will be saved, is if God intervenes with a great revival and reformation. And that's what I'm praying for. I mean, that's why I think the work of pastors and evangelists is so important, because the only way to change this culture is ultimately for God to change hearts and minds. And that only happens through the preaching of the gospel. You know, the gospel is the power of God into salvation. So we've wandered away from God as a country. We've rejected God. And Paul says in Romans 1, when you reject God and you start worshiping the creature rather than the creator, God gives you up. And we're seeing that over and over and over again in the leaders that are elected, in the laws that are being enacted, in the rulings that are happening, you being arrested, you know, things like that. You're seeing God giving up a country over to judgment. So the only recourse is spiritual at the end of the day. I mean, yeah, we can talk about laws and we can try and do those things, but we're going to be in a giant conflict in the public square because our country's so divided. So a spiritual revival, reformation needs to take place. And that's what I'm praying for. That's what I'm working for. That's really the only hope for our country.
Yeah, really well said. And I think that we as Christians need to continue to advocate for that. We need to continue to exercise our freedoms and our religion in terms of fulfilling the Great Commission and doing that while we still can legally as a country, even though, of course, we always can lawfully, because that is a right that God has given to us, that is intrinsic to us to be able to share the good news of the gospel. And we need to pray for this country and hope that our laws will begin to again reflect the truth of God and his morality and his divine nature and his character and his moral authority and legitimacy. Because if not, we are going to consistently just be confused as a country and then ultimately collapse. I mean, that's what happened to the Roman Empire. That's what happened to so many other societies that gave up the objective truth of morality, and they lost God in society. And so they completely imploded or were taken over because they did not ultimately bend the knee to truth. And so I think that in closing here, and I so appreciate your time, Grant Castleberry, I think we do need to be also very careful as Christians in the way that we argue for or against these various definitions of Christian nationalism, and make sure that when we are advocating for an objective standard of truth and morality, we're doing that within the confines of truth and the person of God in Romans 13 and our U.S. Constitution. We're not advocating for a theocracy or blasphemy laws, but we're also not shying away from the truth that all law is inherently moral. And whether we want to use the term Christian nationalism or something else, we need to be very careful about how we articulate it so that we're not arguing something that actually isn't part of good theology. So how can people reach you and continue to participate in the conversation as you have on social media? And I always appreciate your willingness to speak the truth.
I'm on Twitter at GR Castleberry. So that's one way to reach me. I pastor Capital Community Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. So that would be another way to reach out to me. Thank you so much, Jenna, for having me on the show. And always enjoy doing that and enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate your insights. And I hope that everyone who is listening will seriously pray for our country and do exactly what you encourage them to do, Grant, which is to continue to change hearts and minds for Christ and to win souls for the kingdom, because ultimately that's our greatest purpose here, is to come into a saving knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thanks. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you.
On MyPillow's 20-year anniversary, with over 80 million MyPillows sold, Mike Lindell wants to thank each and every one of you by giving you the lowest price in history on his MyPillows. You will receive a queen-size MyPillow for only $19.98. The regular price is $69.98 and just $10 more for a king size. You'll receive deep discounts on all MyPillow products such as bed sheets, mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, which I love, and so much more. This is the time to try out some of the amazing products you've had your eye on from MyPillow. So go to mypillow.com and enter promo code Jenna to receive this amazing offer on the queen size MyPillow for $19.98. You can go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-564-8475. Be sure to use the promo code Jenna. This offer comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. It's time to start getting the quality sleep you deserve. This offer comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. It's time to start getting the quality sleep you deserve. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna.